What's up everybody, welcome back. So we have our team deathmatch spawn points working, and today we're going to take a look at setting up the scoring and the scoreboard. So I have the scoreboard up right here, and as you can see I have my own name marked in yellow so I can easily see where I'm at on the scoreboard. And the winning team is marked in green, and we can display multiple scoreboards at the same time. So if we have a 4-team match, then we can have 4 scoreboards up. So that's what we're going to take a look at today, and maybe we also have time to add our end game conditions so we can actually win a team deathmatch. And then this project is also a bit further down the line, and I can show some stuff that we're going to add in the near future. So we not really forgot, but we just didn't get to adding jumping and crouching. So we're going to add jumping and crouching, and then we also add aim down sight so we can zoom in if we aim. And I also added foot IK in here, so I just copied it from the third person project. So if you're using a different character, it might be a little bit harder to set up. But if you're using the mannequin, you can pretty easy add foot IK, so your foots don't clip into the ground and stuff like that. And then I also added melee, so we can actually melee enemies and kill them that way. So there's some basic stuff coming that we just didn't add yet. Gaining XP for kills, for example, in PvP mode, that's also something we didn't add yet. So all of that stuff is coming soon. So for today, let's dive into the scoreboard and scoring. And if you like the project and you want to get your hands on the project file, you can check out my new Patreon and become a member in there. And then you will get access to some premium channels in the Discord where you will find the project files to download. And if you do not want to become a Patreon, you can also become a YouTube member and you will also get access. So with all of that stuff out of the way, let's dive into today's video. So we ended our last video with a little glitch, and we're going to take a look at that first. So if we are spectating in Team Deathmatch, then we can actually start spectating an enemy, and we don't want that. So let's open up our character and then go to the spectator pawn. And inside of the spectator pawn, we use event on possessed, and in event on possessed, we just get all actors of class and store that in all players. And what we actually want to do is use our update players event, so that will take in account which game mode we are playing and actually filter out the players that we cannot spectate. So we're going to use this event instead. So let's go to on possessed and let's get rid of these two nodes. So the get all actors of class and the setter for all players. And then in here we can simply call our update players. So we want to call the normal event, not server update players, because this is event on possessed, and event on possessed only fires on the server. So we're good to go over there. And then simply plug this in, and this will set the all players array as well. So this will take care of the spectating bug, and we can compile and save that one. And now we can start working on the scoring. So let's go to the framework folder, and first I want to add something to the game state. And that's actually going to be 2 new variables. So I'm going to grab my notes in here. First of all, we need an integer for our game mode PvP number of teams. So game mode PvP number of teams. And that's an integer, and we want to make sure that we set it to replicate. So on the right side, replication replicated. And then we can duplicate this one, and that's going to be the game mode team deathmatch team scores. So TDM team scores. And we want this to be an array of integers, and we also want to make sure that it's replicated. So enable replication over here. And then we are good to go for the game state, so we can compile and save it. And open up our player state next. So in the player state, we're going to add the team ID integer. So also create a new variable in here and call this team ID. So that should be an integer. And for the team ID, we also want to make sure that it's replicated. So turn on replication on the right side. Compile and save that one as well. So a little note while I'm using the player state for the team ID and the game state for the other stuff. So the game state, there's only one of it, and the server pretty much controls it, and it's replicated to all players. So all players can access the game state and get information from it. And player state actually exists for all players. So every player has its own player state, and they are also replicated to all other players. So there's a lot of instances of a player state in a 4-player game. For example, there are 16 player states, quickly from the top of my head. So 16 instances of a player state and 4 different ones. So if we set things like a general game setting, that's not going to change on the player state. We have to set it on every player state separately. And if we change it, we also have to keep it in sync on all of the player states. So that's just a lot harder to do. So in that case, we can use the game mode because there's only one instance of the game, or not one instance, but there's only one game mode and there's an instance on each player. So it's replicated to all players and they can simply access it and get information from it. So that's the difference between the player state and the game state. Hope that kind of makes sense. So with that stuff in place, we can go into our shooter player controller. And first of all, we want to create a new custom event in here. So let's create a custom event. And this one is going to be a HUD update scoreboard. So we want to make sure for replication it's set to run on the owning client. And then we're going to grab our scoreboard from the variables. And first of all, make sure it's valid. So get an is valid, plug it in. And then we also want to know if it's actually up and in the viewport. So let's drag off again and get is in viewport. So we can plug this one into a branch. So hook everything up. And if this is true, then we're going to drag off the scoreboard again and simply call our update scoreboard. So plug it in the true bin. And what we're going to use this for, so if you noticed right now, when you have the scoreboard open and a player makes a kill, the scoreboard doesn't update live. So you have to close it and then open it first again to make sure that the scores are updated. So we're going to call this event every time a player gets a kill. And then this event will determine if the player actually has the scoreboard open. And if it does, it will update the scoreboard. So this is for live updating. And then we also want to make some changes to our event possessed where we load our profile. So if we go over here, we have multicast begin play, and at the end we call our load profile somewhere. Well, it's called in there somewhere. And over here we have the load profile event, and at the end we're having a switch authority where we actually set the profile by the server, so it's replicated to all the instances of the player controller. So we're going to change this up a little bit. First of all, let's disconnect this branch for the server set player profile, and we can get rid of the break struct and team ID stuff. So let's move this over here, and then we can plug this one into the team ID setter. That's not really true, so we're going to add a reroute node and plug it in before that. It doesn't really matter, whatever. Sorry, confusing. Just plug it in and make sure it sets the team ID. And then we want to make sure that our player state is ready because we want to store our team ID on the player state. But we have to make sure the player state is actually loaded, and we are using a function over here, event, called onControllerSpawned. And this actually checks if everything is loaded and then continue loading the controller. But this event runs simultaneously with our begin play event. So we have to make sure that this boolean is true before we do something to our player state. So we're simply going to grab our branch in here with the is player state ready. And we can paste it over here. So that's back in the load profile event after the set team ID. And if the bool returns false, we're going to delay until next tick. So drag off here, delay until next tick. And then plug it back into the branch. So this will simply wait until the player state is loaded. And then once we know it's actually loaded and good to go, we can drag in the variable and set the team ID on the player state. So set team ID, and then simply plug in the team ID from the player controller over here. So that should be good to go. And then we can plug in the bool to make sure that the profile loaded is set as well. So this is set by the server, so this will replicate to all clients, so all clients will know the team IDs of all other players as well if they access the player state. So with that one in place, we can go into the shooter game mode and start setting up some scoring. So let's open up our shooter game mode, and there's a few functions we need to update in here. So let's start with the set game options. Let's open this one up. So over here for the team deathmatch branch, we want to set the TDM scores array. So go to the end over here and make sure that the PvP number of teams is already set, and make sure that you add it somewhere after that. So I'm just going to add it over here after the maximum team size. And what we want to do is grab a for loop. So we're going to look for a for loop. And over here, we want to set the first index to 0. And the last index is going to be the PvP number of teams. And we want to make sure that we subtract one of this. So subtract 1 and plug it into the last index. And then we're simply going to set an array element inside of our team scores array. So we want to create our team scores array in here as well. So that's game mode TDM team scores. And that's an array of integers. And then we can set it over here. So let's drag it in and set an array element. Plug in the loop body, and the item is actually 0, and for the index we can grab it from the loop body and make sure we enable size to fit. So this will simply create an entry in the array for every team. Make sure you plug this into the completed pin and not in the end over here, and then plug this one into the for loop. So we're setting our team scores array right at the game start. Then we want to update our PvP killed player function. So let's open that one, game mode PvP killed player. And in here we want to check if we are playing team deathmatch, and if we are, we might want to end the game at a certain scoring. So let's go to the beginning over here. We add the kills and the deaths for the killer and the victim. So we can move this over and create a little bit of room over here. And the first thing we're going to do is grab a branch, and we're going to we're going to check what game mode we are playing. So grab a branch, and then we're going to grab our current game mode from the variables and simply compare it. So do equal enum, and if this is team deathmatch, so select team deathmatch over here, plug it in. So if this is false, we can actually continue like we used to. So we can plug it into the branch over here that checks for the score limit. And if we are playing team deathmatch, then we want to set our team scores. So a player made a kill over here, and we want to make sure that we add it to the team scores as well. So for this one, we're going to get the array with the team scores, drag off here, and we're going to get, but this time we're not going to get a copy like we do most of the time, but we're going to get a reference. And the difference is, if we make a change to a reference, it will actually update the array immediately. And if we make a change to a copy, we need to save the array after that manually. So this actually updates the array if you change it. So let's get a reference, and we want to get a reference from the killer's team ID. So we can get the killer from the input over here. So get killer. And from the killer we can get the team ID, so we know in what team he is, and plug that into the getter. Something like this. And then we can simply increment it. So drag off here, increment int. And because it's a reference, we do not need to save it. So we can simply plug it in, and that should be good. Then we're going to grab our shooter game state. So that should be in the variables over here. And we can actually update the scores in here as well. So set TDM score, so TDM team scores, plug it in, and we can simply grab the array from the game mode and plug it in over here. So that's synced up. And after that, we want to make sure that we check if we might have won the game or not. So we can simply do something like this, but this time we need to make sure it's for Team Deathmatch. So we're going to grab another branch in here, plug it in, and we're going to check our team scores. So it's basically only needed to check the one that we incremented. So let's grab the team scores from the killer team ID. Let's copy this one, and let's get rid of the reference and make sure that we get a copy again and plug it back in. So if this is greater than or equal to the score limit, so greater or equal to, and let's grab our score limit from the variables, plug it in over here. And we also want to make sure that the score limit is actually set. So if we're using a score limit that's 0, that means there is no score limit. So we're going to grab an end boolean over here and make sure that the score limit is greater than 0. Is greater than, and plug that into the end node, and this will be the win condition. So plug it into the branch, and if this is true, then we want to call our game mode PvP game over. So plug it in directly over here. And if this is false, then we want to update the names for the kill message and the newsfeed. So then we want to plug it into the setter for the victim name over here. So grab the false bin and go to the setter for the victim name. So this will update the PvP killed player for now. We're going to take care of the game over event later, but at least we are calling it. So there's one event in here left to do, and that's the update GameState info. So let's look for that function. It's not an event. And in here we want to set our new variable, so that's the PvP number of teams on the game state as well. So let's drag off the game state and set our PvP number of teams, and we can simply grab the variable from the game mode and plug it in. So that should be over here somewhere, number of teams, and now all players can grab that from the game state. Okay, so the game mode should be good to go as well, and now it's time to do some fun widget stuff. So let's open our widgets folder and go to our widget blueprint scoreboard. So we're actually going to change this up quite a bit. Let's start over here in the designer. I'm going to grab the horizontal box with the match duration and the score limit, and I'm going to drag it outside of the current widget. So I want to display this separately. And then over here for the horizontal box, if it's outside the original widget, I'm going to right click it and then wrap with a border. So we actually have a background again. And I'm going to grab this border and give it my default color. So that's just black with a bit of alpha. And let's align this one first. So I'm going to anchor it to the bottom center of the screen. And then for the alignment, I'm going to say for X that's 0, then for Y it's minus 65, it's going to be 800 wide and 35 high, and then for the alignment it's going to be 0.5, so it's actually centered. And then this border does not need to be a variable, so for now we are pretty good to go in here. We want to grab the border with the actual scoreboard in here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy it. And we want to create a new widget for it, so we can actually create more scoreboards. So let's create a new widget blueprint, user interface. And I'm going to call this my scoreboard base. So widget blueprint, scoreboard base. And open it up. So first let's grab a canvas panel and drop it on top of the scoreboard. Then I'm going to grab a size box. Sorry, we don't need a canvas panel, so let's get rid of the canvas panel and we only want to grab a size box. So that's in the same section under panels. And then with the size box selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste. So we're going to paste the scoreboard widget in here. For the size box, I'm going to set the override for the width and the height, and that's going to be 625 by 320. So 625, 320. And then we want to make a few small changes in here. So I'm going to grab the border with the actual player name and kills that's in it, and I'm going to make that a variable. So let's give it a name, and that's the border header. And make sure is variable is enabled. And we also want to add the team score inside of the header. So I'm going to duplicate the text for the player name. And we also want to make these ones variables, by the way. So what if we start with the top one, and I'm going to call this my text header. And that's a variable, so that's the one with the name. And then I'm going to duplicate this one, and that's going to be my text team score header. So make sure we duplicate it, and that's going to be the text team score header. So for this one, I want to say team score. So for the text over here, team score. And then for the alignment, we want to set it align to right. Fill is good to go. And then for the vertical alignment, we can keep fill as well. And then for the text width, no, we can leave the desired width at 0. So that should be good to go. Then we can grab our next one, and that's the text kills. So we also want this one to be a variable. So let's make it text kills and make sure it's a variable. And for the deaths as well, so give it a proper name, text deaths, and is variable. And then we're still missing one, so we also want to add a number for the team scores. So I'm going to grab the kills over here and duplicate it, and make sure that I drag it above the original one. So we have the team score header and then the duplicated one. So this is going to be the text for the team score. And let's make sure that we enter something like 0 in here, so that actually matches up. And now all we need to do is fix the alignment because something is wrong over here. So let me double check. So for the name, we should be good. Alignment left and set to fill. Then for the team score header, it should be set to fill and then alignment to the right. So that's good to go as well. Then we have the team score that should be auto and then centered. So we're going to select team score, set it to auto and then centered. And then for the kills, we want to set it to fill and then align to right. So not auto, but switch this one to fill. And for the deaths, we should have auto and then right. So select deaths, auto, right. That's good to go. So now the team score is actually somewhat centered and that looks a little bit better. And for the rest, I think this widget is good to go. So let's compile and save it. And we can close this one down and then go back to the actual scoreboard. And in here, we can also get rid of this stuff because we actually have it in a widget now. So let's grab the border over here and just delete it. So all we have left is the game mode text and the little footer over here. Then I'm going to grab a uniform grid panel and I'm going to use that to display the new scoreboards. So I think that's under panels as well. We have the uniform grid panel. I'm simply going to drag it on top of the canvas panel. And let's do the alignment first. So I'm going to set the anchor to the screen center. And then I'm going to make it position 0, 125. So 0 for X and 125 for Y. And then the size is going to be 1300 by 650. So 1300, 650. And then alignment over here is going to be 0.5 and then 0.6. So it's a little bit more up. 0.5, 0.6. So for the uniform grid panel, we want it to be a variable. So let's make sure it's a variable. I'm just going to call it uniform grid panel and enable it over here. And then in here we can drag in one of our scoreboard widgets. So let's go to user created and let's drag in our scoreboard base on top of the uniform grid panel. So that's the first scoreboard that we're going to use. And then we should be good to go, I think. So this widget stuff is always pretty confusing. Yeah, I think we're good to go. So let's compile and save it. And now we can go back into the graph to fix some of the errors because we deleted some variables and things like that. And we're going to set up the new scoreboard. So let's open up the graph and we need to set up a few variables and change some stuff in here. So let's start with event construct, and over here after the setter for the shooter player controller, I'm going to disconnect it and I'm going to move this stuff over to the left a little bit. So we want to make sure that we store our player name to make it a little bit easier for us to highlight our own player name. So we're going to drag off the shooter player controller and we're going to get our player profile. And then we can break the structure over here and simply grab the player name from it and store it in a variable. So promote to variable, and that's my player name. Fine. And we can save it. So that's good to go and easy for us to access later. Now let's disconnect this update scoreboard because we want to move it to the end of the execution, and we're going to plug this one back into the set text. So we're going to get back to this one later. Let's move it to the side, and then we want to move the text over. And first we're going to grab a branch over here and plug it in. And we want to create an array for all of the scoreboards that we have on screen. So we're going to create a new array. Talking is pretty hard sometimes. So that's going to be our TDM all scoreboards. So TDM all scoreboards, and turn it into a scoreboard base array. So widget blueprint scoreboard base. And then that's an array. So we want to drag in the array over here and make sure that it's not empty. So drag off here, look for is empty. And then we're going to plug that one into the condition. So if the array isn't set yet, we need to make sure that we set it. So then we're going to grab our all scoreboards and we're going to add our scoreboard base. So that's the one that's actually in here by default. So we want to grab our TDM all scoreboards, drag off here and do add. Plug this one into the true pin and then grab our scoreboard base from the variables and plug that one in over here. So this is the only one that always exists, and the other ones we're going to create them on the fly. So we're going to add those later to the array. After this, we want to store our current game mode. So if we go back a little bit over here, we have our shooter player controller. We access our game state, grab the current game mode. So we can drag off here and promote this to a variable as well. So current game mode. Make sure we plug in the false pin and the true pin. So we have that stored and easy to access as well. So then we can plug this one into the switch and make sure that we have the execution hooked up. So that's good to go. Now we can actually set up our team deathmatch branch in here to make sure that's working. So let's see, first of all, for the endless wave, let's start at the top. That's a little bit easier. Maybe we're going to grab our uniform grid panel. And we're going to get it as a canvas slot. So get slot as canvas slot. No. Really? Oh, you don't want to type get. So slot as canvas slot. And then from here we can set stuff like the size and things like that. And we actually want to set it to auto size. So we're going to drag off here and set auto size. And enable it. So this will make sure that if we have one scoreboard on the screen, it will resize the uniform grid panel so the scoreboard is actually centered again. So we're going to do the same thing if we're playing free for all. So let's copy this and paste it over here. And we actually want to move this stuff over. So make sure you grab the uniform grid panel as well, plug this in, and this should be free for all. And then for team deathmatch, we need to make sure that we set our number of team variables, and we also want to set it on our scoreboard. So we're going to create a new variable, GameMode TDM number of teams. And we can actually grab that from our GameState. So we can plug in a setter over here, but we do need to make sure that it's an integer. And then plug it in and go all the way to the beginning over here. So we have the shooter GameState. We can drag off here and get our PvP number of teams. So we can store it on the widget. And then we can plug this back into the set text nodes. So we actually set the match duration and the score limit. So from the setter into the set text, and also grab the branch for free for all and plug those in here as well. So that's set up, and after all that stuff, we want to update the scoreboard. So we want to plug the update scoreboard in at the end over here, and we're going to do that for the endless wave as well. Plug this one in. So free for all is already connected, so we have all three of them hooked up to update scoreboard again. So that should be our event graph, and now we can completely change up our update scoreboard event or function. So let's open up our update scoreboard function, and the first thing we want to do is get rid of this clear children node. Just delete it, and to make our lives a little bit easier, we're also going to get rid of the return node. So we have this left, and for this we're actually going to create this as a new function. So let's select all of it, right click, and we're going to create a function. So collapse to function, and this one is going to be called sort players in team. Sort players in team. And then if we open it up, we want to give this two inputs. So the first one is going to be the team ID. And that's an integer. And we also want the player states array. So we're going to add the player states. And that's an array of our shooter player states. So look for shooter player state. And turn it into an array. So now for the for each loop, we can get rid of the getters over here, and we're simply going to plug in the input from the function. And then we can use the team index to fix our error over here. So we do not have a vertbox scoreboard anymore, so we can get rid of this variable. And in replacement, we want to grab our all scoreboards array. And from this, we're going to get a copy. And then we can plug in the index from the input. So not from the for each loop, but from the input of the function. And from this scoreboard, we can get the vertbox again. So get vertbox scoreboard. And then we can plug this one into the add child node. So we have that error fixed. Then we want to create the local variables that are missing. So over here we have the local scoreboard row array. And we want to simply create it. So create local variable. Do the same thing for the kill count. So we have that as a local variable. The index with maximum value local variable. And then those should be good to go. And now I want to make a small change over here at the end of the for each loop. So we want to make sure that if this is our own player name, we can change the color in the scoreboard so we can actually see our own name a little bit easier. So I'm going to drag off the player name that comes from the player state. And at the end, I'm simply going to compare it. So do equal, and you could use case insensitive, I guess, or exactly whatever you prefer. And then we can plug in my player name. So if this is true, this is actually the scoreboard row for my own name. And then we want to change the color. So let's hook a branch up here. And then we can simply set the color and opacity of the return value over here. So we're creating the scoreboard row, and we can drag off here, get the border for the player name. No, border scoreboard row, so that's probably not a variable yet. So if you want to be able to change the color, let's open our scoreboard row. And this indeed is not a variable yet, so we're going to select the border over here, give it a name, and that's the border player name. And make sure is variable is enabled, then compile and save. And now if we go back, we can actually get it from the scoreboard row. So get player name border and set the color and opacity. Oh no, set the brush color. Set brush color. It's a border, so we do not want to set the color and opacity. And then over here you can set the color, so I'm just gonna make it a little bit oranges. Something like this maybe. So we have our own player name highlighted. Now we can compile and save this function and go back to the actual update scoreboard. So now we can start building this one up, and it's going to change quite a little bit. So first of all, we want to grab our current game mode and we're going to switch. So depending on the game mode, we want to change what we are doing in here. So let's start at the top. If we're using endless wave or free for all, we can simply grab the scoreboard from the variables over here, because there's only one scoreboard. So in this case, we're going to grab all of our TDM scoreboards and get index 0. And we want to clear the children first to make sure that we start empty. And we actually need to get the vert box. So drag off the scoreboard and get the vert box scoreboard, and we can clear the children in the vert box. So clear children. So this one goes into the endless wave and the free for all. And after that, we want to grab a for each loop, and we want to loop through all of the player states. So let's grab a for each loop. And then we can grab the player states from our player controller. So drag in the player controller. From the player controller, get the game state. So that's the shooter game state. And by default on the shooter game state is an array with all of the player states. So we can grab that. So get the player array. So that's a default variable inside of the game state. And this will return player states. But the only thing is, those aren't defined as our own custom shooter player state. So from here we want to drag off the array element and make sure that we cast them to our shooter player state. And we want to store these ones inside of a local array. So we're going to create a local team player states array. So let's create a local variable. Local team player states. And this one is actually of the shooter player states type. So shooter player state. And make sure it's an array. So we're going to drag it in and we're going to set an array element. Plug it in over here. So the player state is the item. The index comes from the for each loop. Make sure we enable size to fit. And then if the for each loop is done, we can grab our sort players in team function that we just created. So this is a single team game, so we can simply leave team ID to 0 and then plug in our team player states array. So this doesn't really make sense, but we're going to use this later, so it's not really useless to create the variable. So this is really what all we need for these two game modes. This is not too complicated. For Team Deathmatch we need to set up a little bit more stuff. And to do that we need a boolean to determine if this is the first time this function is running or not. So let's create a variable and I'm going to call this TDM first setup. So TDM first setup, and that's a single bool. So we're simply going to check if this is true or not. So we do want to make sure, by the way, that we compile it and set the default to true. So the first time we run it, it's true. Compile and save it. Plug it into the branch. So if this is the first time we're actually setting this up, we want to create all of the scoreboards and store them in the array. First of all, we're going to set this one to false so it doesn't happen again. Then we can grab our TDM all scoreboards because we already have one existing, and we're going to get a copy. So this is the one that's in the designer by default, and we want to change it up a little bit. So we're going to drag off here and we're going to get the text for the header. And we actually want to change it to say team 1. So we're going to drag off here and set text. And make sure that we type in team 1. So again, this is the one that already exists. So this will always be used for team 1. And then we want to grab the team score header and the team score, and we want to hide those. So let's grab the team score header and also grab the team score. And both of this, we want those. Sorry, we don't want to hide them. We want to set them to visible. So set visibility and make sure both of them are visible. And then we're going to grab the text for the kills and the deaths from the solo games, or not solo, but single team games. So get kills and get deaths, and those are the ones we're going to hide. So set the visibility again, but for these ones, set it to hidden. And plug them in as well. Thank you. And now we want to create the other scoreboards. So we're going to grab a for loop. And this time we're not going to start at index 0 because we already have a scoreboard. So we're going to start at index 1. And the last index is going to be our number of teams. So we stored that in the variables. We do need to make sure that we subtract one of it. And then plug it into the last index. So for each team we want to create a scoreboard. So let's create a widget. And we're going to create our scoreboard base. That's all the way down here, scoreboard base. So for the owning player, we can simply grab the shooter player controller from the variables and plug it in. And then we want to store it inside of our all scoreboards array. So let's grab TDM all scoreboards and we're going to set an array element, plug it in. So the item is the return value, index comes from the for loop, and enable size to fit. Then we want to add it to our uniform grid panel. So we need to drag in our grid panel over here. And we're going to add child to uniform grid. So add child to uniform grid. If you pick this one, you can actually define the row and the column you want to add it in. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag off our array element, index. And over here we have a 2x2 square. So we can use that to determine the position if we drag off the index. And for the first one, we're going to divide it by 2. So this is an integer. So if we divide 2 by 1, it will return 0. It doesn't return 0.5 because it's an integer. So this goes into the row. And then we can use a modulo. So drag off the index again and look for the percentage sign. And if we do modulo 2, this will actually return the value that's left after dividing this by 2. So for example, if we divide 2 by 2, we have 0 left. So this will return 0. If we divide 3 by 2, this will have 1 left. So it will return 1. So if we plug this into the column, this will make sure the scoreboards line up in the correct uniform grid slot. So for the content, we want to plug in the return value again. And then that one is good to go. And now all we need to do is set our text header and hide the text like we did over here. So we can basically just grab all of this stuff, set text and set visibility with all of the getters, copy it, go to the end of the loop body, and we're going to paste it, plug it in over here, and then we can use the return value to plug it in over here. So make sure that you connect up the return value from the create widget to all of the getters. And then all we need to do is format this text to make sure that the text actually matches up. So let's drag off here, do format text. And we want to say team, open bracket, a close bracket. And then we can plug in our index from the for loop, but we want to add one to it. So drag off here, add one. And then plug that one into the A pin. So this will give the correct result over here. I do notice I made a tiny mistake. So over here for the text kills and the text deaths, we don't want to set them to hidden, but we want to set them to collapsed. So that way they also don't take up any space, and we can use the entire header over here to display the text for the team score. So if we go back a little bit, for the first widget, we also want to set this one to collapsed. So not hidden, but collapsed. Okay, so that's the for loop that creates all of our scoreboards. And we only want to do this the first time we run this function. And then we are good to go to start actually updating it. So we're going to grab a for each loop, and then we're going to grab the completed pin from the for loop and plug it in. And we're also going to grab the false pin from the first setup branch and plug that one in as well. And then we can start setting things up. So we want to grab all of our scoreboards, and first we want to clear the children. So we can drag off here and we can get the vert box and clear all children inside of the vert box. Plug it in the loop body. And that's good to go. Then we're going to grab all of our player states again. So we could pretty much go all the way to the top and grab this for each loop with the getters. And then we're going to go down again, paste it, and we want to connect it up to the completed pin. So we have all of our player arrays again, and we want to cast them and store them in all of our shooter player arrays or player states array. So we want to create a new local variable. So let's duplicate this one, and this is going to be local all player states. So if we store this, we do not need to keep getting it. So that's the only reason I'm doing it. So over here, we want to grab the array element and cast to our shooter player state. And if that's true, we can store it inside of our local array. So add array, set array element. And plug everything in. So the player state is the item, and the index comes from the for each loop. And make sure we enable size to fit. So we have those stored, and now we can go down and go for a for loop again. Plug it into the completed pin. So this time we're going to start at index 0, and the last index is going to be the number of teams minus 1. So drag it in, subtract 1. And this is our last index from the for loop. So we want to grab all of the player states that belong to this team. So we can simply grab the local array for all player states, and we want to make sure that we clear it first. So the old ones that we stored in here are gone. And then we're going to grab a for each loop. And we're going to loop through all of our player states. And we're actually going to check the team ID on here. So let's drag off and get the team ID. And we can simply compare it to the index from the for loop. So drag off here is equal to, and grab the index from the for loop. So if this is true, we want to store this player state in an array. So we know this belongs to this team. So we can grab the other array that we already created, the team player states, and we're going to add this. So add, plug it in the true bin and add the array element. So if this for each loop is done, then we have all player states that belong to this team ID stored in the other local array. And then we can simply grab our stored players in team, plug it into the completed bin. And over here we want to plug in our team player states array. So the local team player states. And the team ID comes from the for loop as the index. So this will actually grab all of the player states from the team, update the scoreboard, and then go to the next team, grab those player states, update that scoreboard. So that's what's happening over here. And now if that's done, then all we need to do is determine what team is winning. So we're going to grab all of our team scores from the game state. So grab PlayerController and then Shooter GameState. And from here we can grab our team scores array. So get team scores. And let's store it in a local variable. Why not? So this is going to be local team scores. And then make sure we plug it into the completed bin of the for loop. So the for loop over here, not for each loop, not over here. And then we can get the maximum of an int array. So drag off the array and do max of int array. So this will simply return the highest value inside of the array and the index that belongs to it. So over here we're going to drag off the index of max value and again promote it to a local variable. And this is our local winning team index. So make sure we plug everything in. And now we can grab a for each loop again, plug in all of our team scoreboards. There we go. And from the team scoreboard, we want to first set the team score. So let's drag off the array element and we're going to set the team score. So not the header. Oh, really? I'm messing up. Sorry. So we're going to drag off the array element and first we need to get the actual text variable. So we want to set get the text team score and then we can set the text. There we go. So it's like we never did it before. So we can plug it into loop body. And then for the team scores, we have the array. So let's drag in our team scores array. And we can get a copy. And then simply get the copy from the array index. So this is the score of this team. We want to do toText from an integer. And then we can expand this and we could disable grouping, although our scores probably won't be that high, and simply plug it in over here. So this will first set the text and then we want to determine if we are the winning team or not. So we can drag off here and then we can grab our local team scores. And we're also going to make sure that we do not have a tie. So we're going to make this condition a little bit bigger than simply checking for the winning team. So the local team scores and we want to get a copy from the winning team index. Plug it in over here. So we do want to make sure that this is greater than 0. So if all teams still have 0, the max from int array will still return a value. So we do not want to highlight anything if there's no scoring yet. So let's do greater than 0. Then we're going to drag off here and look for an AND boolean. So we want to know if we are the winning team index maybe. So let's drag off the array index from the scoreboard array and do equal to. Plug in our local winning team index. And we can also be tied with another team. So we're going to drag off this one and we're going to look for an OR boolean. And we want to check our winning team index again from the team scores. So we can simply grab this getter, paste it over here. And then we want to compare it to our own team score. So let's get another getter for the team scores. And for this one, we want to plug in our array index. And if these ones are equal, so do equal, then we are tied as a winning team. So we want to highlight 2 teams, or 3, or however many there are. So this is the condition. We can plug this into the branch, and then we simply want to set the colors. So we want to grab the border for the header, drag off the scoreboard, get border header, and then we can set the brush color again. That brush color. So copy and paste it, make sure it's connected to both of them. And then for the winning team, I'm going to make the brush color greenish. Something like this. And then for the other one, simply set it to my default brush color, and that's going to be 111 and then 0.5. So that's my default border color, and simply plug it into the false bin. Okay, so this should be good to go. Yeah, this should be good. So we have our update scoreboard done as well, and this should actually be everything we need. So let's run a little test and make sure everything is working. So I ran a quick little test to save a little bit of time, and I did actually make a pretty stupid mistake. So inside of the update scoreboard, we want to change something. So update scoreboard, you have the branch with the first setup, and there's a for loop in there. You do not want that for loop, but if you scroll down, there's another for loop here. After that, we have a for each loop, and over here I'm clearing all the player states and then loop through them. So that's not going to work, obviously. So we want to loop through all of the player states, and we want to clear the local team player states, because that's the array we're actually setting over here. So we want to make sure if we run a new loop body that this array is empty, and we do not want to touch this array. We simply want to loop through it. So make sure clear team player states, for each loop all player states, and then we can compile and save. So I'm going to launch a game and we can test it. So the game is set up and good to go. Let's launch it. And by the way, in the next episode we're going to work on team colors. So each team will have its own color, and the characters in game will also have the correct matching color, so you actually know who you have to shoot in a team deathmatch game. So that's a little side note. So let's check out the scoreboard, and this seems to be good. So my name is highlighted, and if I would go to another player, the other name is highlighted, so that's good. And now we want to make sure that our team scores are actually added, so let's get a couple of kills in here. I should probably get a kill with the other player, by the way, so let's respawn these guys and then grab this girl or guy, I don't even know. And we want to get a kill over here as well. So right now, oh, that was the wrong team. So one team has a score of 2, the other has 1. So you can see the winning team is highlighted, so that's working at least. Now if I would grab one of the blue guys, so that should be this one. No, the one I just killed. So if this guy gets a kill, it should get added to the other guys, and we should have a combined score of 3, so that's actually working as well. So we have the team score and the scoreboard working, highlights, and all of that looks good. So nice, good to go. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.